Now it's time to start the seminar. This is the international workshop on operationalizing transformative science and technology innovation policy and the future challenges, experiences from Japan and overseas. My name is Makiko Matsuo. I would like to serve as the moderator. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to invite Dr. Shiroyama Hideaki, Research Director from the Tokyo Foundation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking your time out of a busy schedule to be here to participate in the Tokyo Foundation for Policy Research International Workshop Implementing Transformative STI Policy and Future Challenges in Japan and Abroad. My name is Hideaki Shiroyama, Research Director, the Tokyo Foundation for Policy Research. Within this organization, we are implementing the research program, reconstructing the science and technology policy system. And here, we'd like to hold this workshop to cover our experiences in Japan and also experiences abroad, centering around transformative STI policy operation. And we'd like to use this mission based the STI policies. So here, we'd like to hear a lot about the audience and the speakers as to how we are able to proceed from here. And as to how we conduct this workshop, I will be the first to make a report, which will be followed by a report by Dr. Winickoff from OECD and Dr. Polt from the Joanneum Research Institute, who is knowledgeable in this area. Then after that, we'll have a discussion. We have Dr. Kurata from Ministry of Education and Technology, and we have Dr. Oyamada from JST. And also we'd like to take comments and questions from the floor. And we'd like to receive comments from the members of the research program of the Reconstructing the Science and Technology Policy System. Time is limited. We only have 1 hour and a half, but we'd like to have a very good discussion. And in summer, we are planning to make a proposal of the policies. So here, we'd like to listen to the voices from all of you about the kind of proposals that we have to make, maybe here and also maybe after this meeting. Allow me to turn to English.
Workshop on transformative STI policy, the operation and future agenda based on the experience in Japan and overseas. This is organized by the research project focusing on the restructuring of the science technology policy system in the Tokyo Foundation for Policy Research. So also in Japan, we have interest in the transformative science and technology innovation policy, and there are some experience in the context of Japan. But today, we'd like to hear the input from the European experience and also the technology governance perspective from the OECD experiences. Based on that, we'd like to discuss about the future issue and what's operational challenges for managing the science and technology policy focusing on the transformation. So we will have 3 lectures by myself and Dr. Winickoff and Dr. Polt. Then after that, we have a panel discussion having inputs from the practitioners, Mr. Oyamada from the JST, and also from the Ms. Kurata from the ministries of the education and the science and technology in Japan. So that's how we will organize this workshop. So for about the 2.5 hours, but we'd like to have a fruitful discussion. So thank you for participating. So the main presentation by Japanese will be in Japanese, so please utilize the simultaneous the translation for listening to us. はい、それではよろしくお願いいたします。
はい、城山先生どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much for your attention.
We would like to move on to the first part. There are 3 lectures. The very first one, keynote speech, is by Dr. Shiroyama on transformative STI policy, institutional design, operation, issues and directions for the future. Dr. Shiroyama, please. Yes, thank you for the introduction. I am Shiroyama. And I would like to talk about the discussions that we have so far from the research programs to put together the summary of the transformative STI policy, operation issues, and directions for the future. First of all, how can I use this? Okay. So first, transformative STI policy is of a great interest in many parties. And there are several important elements. There are three people's excerpts from their papers. The first point is, at the top, as you can see, specific problems and grand challenges. So those are social challenges. So that is one of the important elements. And the second element is based on that. When we work on social problems, rather than working on specific elements, we have to deal with the system. So system transformation is necessary. So that's on the fourth line in the first concept. And on technical system, transformative system has to be dealt with. And also the policy research should be a package of different elements. And the last one says multifaceted policy intervention. So these are the things that are used for policy tools. So that's the second point. And the third point, as you can see at the last paragraph, is multifaceted actor. Rather than just a single actor, we need to see a concerted efforts by multiple actors beyond the boundaries of ministries, agencies, and also private public sectors. So multifaceted approach is necessary. So in such transformative innovation policy, these are discussed in different contexts. First of all, I think that Polt-san is going to touch upon this later. But when we talk about mission-oriented, there is a traditional classical mission-oriented, like a Manhattan Project for atomic bomb and the Apollo Project for the launching the mission to the moon. So those are the classical mission. But right now, we are looking at the grand challenges and the social challenges and the missions for those things. And then the actors are very diversified, distributed. And the three stages innovation policies are what we talked about for research and development. This is the first stage. And the second stage is, as you can see, national innovation system discussed since 1980s. And today's problem is social and environmental challenges, how we can cope with this. So those are the three stages. And we see the last stage is what we are talking about today. And also, as Mr. Matsuo said, the market failure justification and market creating framework. This is another element. And the market creating framework can be very diverse. And transformative innovation policy is sometimes positioned in these contexts as well. And today, mission-oriented program or mission-oriented innovation policy programs, MOIP is what we would like to put some focus. And as you can see in number 1, later on, maybe there will be comments from Oyamada-san, but there is an OECD program, and this is the definition of OECD. As I said earlier, social against social challenges, coordinated packages of policy and measures. This is what they are doing under MOIP to work on social problems and transformative STI policies. So this is one of the tools. As I said earlier, so when we say mission-oriented, there is a classical mission, and we need to incorporate those as well. So in that sense, Manhattan Project and Apollo Project, these are not excluded, and we should cover both classical and latest and newest approaches and projects. And those are from different natures. I'm sure that Polt-san is going to talk about this later in his presentation. These two are different in nature, but there are some commonalities according to some researchers. For example, it's important to have a long-term support, and also the criteria for the selection projects is important, and the social return has to be taken into consideration. Communication with users is also important. So these are common aspects. So what is common and what is different? We have to distinguish those. In other words, for mission-oriented innovation programs, can cover very diverse topics. So a program of this kind is tested mainly in Europe. Europe is the center of this experiment. And there are different points, but Polt-san is going to touch upon this, so I like to skip this basically. But from the Japanese perspective or from EU speakers' perspectives, these are the things that I thought interesting. The first point is that in Europe, the social problem solution and technical development, and not only that, demand creation and end user perspectives are important. So from the beginning of the 21st century, people started talking about these comments. And in EU, a whole report was issued back in 2006, talking about the demand creation. And the current program's precursor was the Horizon program from 2014 to 2020. In this era, the mechanism has been created. Back in 2009, Japan started discussing those issues. So there are some commonalities between Japan and Europe, and also there are differences as well. So that kind of MOIP, mission-oriented program, emerged probably first in Horizon 2020, when there was an interim review process. In the interim review process, there were different challenges, but the social challenges have to be coped with because it's a new challenge, but it was a new effort, but the achievement ratio was not so high. So how we can solve this issue was discussed, and as a solution, impact-focused mission-oriented approach was proposed in the interim report. And the direction of that is also reflected in the Lamy report, which is more political level. And there, in Lamy report, mission-oriented approach was touched upon. When we talk about the social challenge, if we talk about social challenge, it's a broad issue. Therefore, we should focus on missions and translate the missions into measurable impact KPIs. That was the argument there. However, at that time, when we talked about the mission-oriented, it was not only for social transformation. There were breakthrough type classical missions also included in those discussions. Also, based on these discussions, there was a famous Matsuo report issued back in 2018, where mission-oriented policies were defined, and together with the principles for that. And it should be bold and with a clear direction, and it should be ambitious and realistic and cross-cutting and bottom-up. So those were the 5 principles under this report. So based on that, Horizon Europe was introduced back in 2021, where the 3 pillars were proposed again, especially for global challenge and the industrial competitiveness. In order to ensure those, mission-oriented program was introduced. Later on, Polt-san will give you more details, I suppose, but there were 5 missions adopted in Europe at that time. Later on, I will touch upon the situation in Japan to evaluate the Japan situation. There are some operational characteristics in Horizon Europe, so I'd like to touch upon those first. First, there is a role of board for each mission, and mission chair is the person who is visible politically as well. So that seems to be the framework. So I heard this in the commission discussions, but basically, for the setting of the mission in this process, the aspect was very important. Also in this process, involvement of citizens was also carried out as well. and not necessarily on a day-to-day management, but in the initial stage, the board involvement was important. So we have to think about how to do this in Japan. And the second area is the coordination between sectors in this MOIP type of program. This is very important. So what was interesting here in this area was mission managers, which is the people whose role is to do the coordination in EU. Within the Commission, there are some government people, bureaucrat people who are taking those roles. What was interesting is that the mission managers, they have the directors of DG level of each bureau, and this person will be supported by Director General's lower level people, section manager or manager level people. So those sector level managers and the research level managers, PD and PM, have to work together. So in the case of in Japan, program director and program managers, we tend to take those people from outside, like private sector or research community. And this kind of discussion was held internally, but this was not adopted in the case of EU. That was interesting. And lastly, in terms of activities, evaluation is very important. In Horizon Europe, there is a broad range of discussions on evaluation and how to address the current situation in the current regime of each sector. In that sense, exit strategy was also discussed in this paper. So this is for the European case, operations of Horizon Europe. And there are several papers I read on the research of these programs. As I said, the current situation is very, very diverse. That is something people say in these papers. I'm sure that the Polt-san will discuss this. For example, they decide the mission and then do the technological development operation in order to solve the issue. But in fact, in reality, there are cases where the problem is clear, but when the problem is not so clear, what kind of solution or technologies they use, they can choose from diverse options, or sometimes there is a clear choice of technology in the first place, and then based on the technology, they decide on the problems. This is the diagram. In short, problem is on the x-axis when it's clear and convergent. And then in this case, appropriate solutions will be chosen from different options. That's one case. But in another case, regarding the problems, solutions, when there is a convergent views, when there is agreement, and then the problems can be diverse. So classical missions and modern missions, these are interlinked with this choice as well. So how clear the problem is and how clear the solutions are. So there are different versions. So in that sense, this is a very important framework when we think about the application to Japan. So now I would like to move on to the situation in Japan. This is the overview. In the case of Europe, back in 2006, 2014, they had issued those programs. Those were important key turning points. So there was a sense of problem, which is in common in Japan as well in those days. In 2009, in Japan, there was a change in the government administration, and then the DPJ took the reign of the government, and then they introduced a science and technology policy. And then after that, there was a great earthquake, and trust into science became an issue. And in 2011, the fourth Science and Technology Basic Plan focused on the resolution of the issues. And lastly, there was another political change. And in 2007, with the LDP new government, the work on social problems still continued For example, in 2016, the fifth Science and Technology Basic Plan was issued, and they raised the Society 5.0 and the Super Smart Society as well. So in a sense, technology is there as a tool to bring solution to those social problems. So that direction was continued. Well, although Society 5.0 was not clearly defined, but the basic direction was continued after the change of the government. When you look at each individual program, the MOIP in Japan did exist and did appear one by one since then. You see in parentheses 2 and 3, for example, the number 2 is Strategic Innovation Program, or SIP. The first one came into place in 2014, the second one 2018, the third one in 2023. And the purpose was to bring solution to social issues. That was the focus. And then this scope included all the way to the implementation in society. In terms of governance within the government, CSTI or SISTI organization took the initiative and had a top-down management. So this was one of the frameworks we have seen. And after that, from 2018, they started a discussion and established the Moonshot program back in 2020. This is for the development system. So this is for long-term 2050 grand challenges that was in scope to organize the STI policy going forward on a long-term basis. So in that sense, there are some common aspects because it's long-term and based on social problem, but this is also focused very much on R&D and focused on the high-risk, high-return R&D. And there were different portfolio combinations. That's why portfolio approach was adopted. So in terms of governance, the Cabinet Ministries Office, SISTI, played an important role, but their management was not so strict because they respected the freedom of research. So when you look at this, the first point, there are several different characteristics. In the case of Europe, well, with the MOIP, it was not a brand new project. It was based on the continuous existing R&D or sector-by-sector programs. They focused on how to link, bring about the linkage between those. But in the case of Japan, outside of the ministry's budgets, they have set another budget to start the SIP and the Moonshot program. So that was the difference. And also, as I said earlier, the PDs, they took PDs from outside, and rather than bottom up, Japan used a top-down target setting approach. And also for MOIP, it was not just a single program. There was the combination of many different small-sized MOIPs in Japan. So those were the characteristics in Japan. So in this way, 2024 or from 2020, the new program was adopted in Japan. And then for transformative elements, those are the new elements. After 2020, new discussions started to deal with these issues. First is the basic law for the science and technology policy. It was amended to incorporate social science, not only social science, but also humanities area. And also definition was provided and more details were formulated.
Starting 2021, the sixth basic, the science and technology plan had been implemented, and the transformative innovation that we are talking about has been clearly cited. In order to realize that, what is shown here is the convergence of knowledge, or sogoji in Japanese. This is needed. You talked about the literature kind of the the kind of the social sciences that we have been talking about. In order to realize that, it is important to do that, just to connect the science and technologies solely pertaining to the humanities and creation of innovations to the scope of the law. So this is the streamlined view of what I just explained. For each project LC, it is important to focus on the ethics or the life science or the other innovations. So the changes of the behavior is important. So these are the tools for transformation of behavior. So what it's meant here is that humanities and social sciences are tools for the transformation of behavior. In order to do this, it is important to change the entire structure, humanities and social sciences, as a basis for institutional reform. And also, we have to select the sense of values. So that's the reason why we need to focus more on the convergence of knowledge. That has been the major flow of the discussions. And also about SIT. To start with, this has been very much focused on the social implementation, and then in the SIP, the third SIP, the social implementation in the area of emphasis. They focused on the technology and also commercialization, institution, social acceptance, and human resources. And the level of achievement should be made clear. So for that purpose, they started working on the discussion of the criteria and measures to look into the result. And then I'd like to share with you one example. And this is about the autonomous driving. And this is the SIP program transition phase 1, the example. We started with the transition phase 1, and the purpose here was to reduce the traffic accidents. Especially important is the dynamic mapping for the purpose of reduction of traffic accidents, and the technology, the development R&D are very much focused on the reduction of traffic accidents. But when it goes to the second phase, it has been expanded, and on top of the reduction of the accidents, this has been expanded to the realization of the autonomous driving. And then on the third phase, further change took place, and we had the target, and the target here is to seek for the way of the new mobility. Autonomous driving that we had in mind back then had been implemented on one hand, but now there is a change to expand the scope for that. So in that respect, the relationship between solution and problems is reflected onto the program itself. And then, in the case of SIP, one thing that is quite interesting is that it has a project management system, but also in the government we have the structure which goes beyond the borders of the various organizations. So this is a roadmap, and they have the framing of social benefits, and here the minimum level of benefit is determined, and here especially important in the third SIP that we are having right now is not only focusing on the autonomous driving, but also the issues also can be expanded into the expansion of mobility in the region. And also autonomous driving is not only about the vehicles, but also this can be expanded to the roads or maybe drones. So that's the kind of path we had. And this is what we have been doing. This is a major flow in Japan, or direction in Japan we are taking. And also here, in thinking about the mission-oriented program, there could be several issues that we have to deal with. One is how we are able to establish the mission, or how we are able to work on the operation of the missions. In what way are we able to translate the challenges into missions? What kind of people are needed for the participation in the emission setting process? So these are the things that we need to work on. And it is not that we are able to have one solution, but rather the mission itself could be clearly stated. So there could be some range, and also how we are able to integrate that with the technology is another area. So these are the things we have to consider in thinking about the challenges. We will listen to the the presentation of the technology governance of OECD and mission-oriented innovation in the European countries. I think this kind of thinking can be reflected onto what they say. And also, when we try to work on the mission-oriented the activities, we have to go beyond the borders among different industry, among the borders between private and public. And also we have to secure capacity. Major issue would be to build capacity that is needed. In the case of Japan, we have the program in each organization, and on top of that, we have the cabinet office. We have the different systems, the moonshot and others. So, in what way are we able to connect this, especially in the case of programs of the cabinet office, and also the kind of programs of the government agencies and ministries? How we are able to connect them would be a major issue. And about the coordination. Is it possible to have the connection within the programs, or maybe we can have connection with the policy intervention? Lastly, I'd like to speak about how we are able to partner with social actors. It is important to have the close connection with the social actors. So that means that we have to involve the newcomers or the players in the society. Mission-oriented program is one experiment. So we are able to see this as the intermission relations-based the program, niche-based program, and this is called the exit strategy. And this also would constitute a major element about the mission-based or mission-oriented activities, how we are able to invite and engage researchers. Researchers are able to only focus on the kind of things that are the facts. So they are working on the identification of the facts, and then how we are able to connect that to the mission-oriented the programs and the points. And also one more thing, how we are able to have it reflected onto regulations and rules. So this is called mission-oriented lobbying. And finally, to deal with the social problems and social issues, they are the issues of each country, and also they are the international problems. In the case of EU, with the international collaboration, they try to realize that. And then, what kind of things can we do in Japan? This is very much important. For example, in the industrial collaboration. So this is something we are not able to avoid. So these are the things that we have to see as the future challenges. I'm sorry I was speaking really fast, but that's all for me. Thank you very much. I think I was able to set the stage. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shiroyama. About the transformative innovation policy and MOIP, mission-oriented innovation policy, we have the diversity inherent to them, and then based on that, we'd like to listen to the voices of the European experts, and then we would like you to speak about this, and then finally we'd like to think about the challenges that we are faced with, and also future directions. So you just talked about the things that I just explained, and are there any comments? Well, certainly we will have a discussion later on, but about the facts, are there any questions to clarify what was mentioned here? I was not thinking of mentioning this initially, but if you have any questions, please put them in the QA box. So during this session, please feel free to write down your questions in the QA box. At this point, we don't have any. So the time is running short. So we'd like to move on to the next report.
デイビッド・ウィニコフさん。
So next is Dr. David Winickoff.
I'm trying to introduce you. So, Winickoff さんは
Dr. Winickoff is from OECD BNCT, Working Party on Bio, Nano, and Converging Technology. He's the secretary and a senior policy analyst. David, floor is yours. Could you share your screen, please?
Can you see that?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Makiko-san and Hideaki-san and the Tokyo Foundation for hosting this really interesting event, as well as my fellow speakers. It's great to be with you. I want to, again, express appreciation to this group who've become consistent interlocutors on issues of technology governance, and with whom I feel we're kind of on a similar journey and co-developing some of these ideas. This talk looks at a new piece of work, a draft framework for the governance of emerging technologies. It tries to do so, however, in the context of this conversation about why we might want to think about technology governance as part of the discourse of transformative innovation policy. Well, I think the basic argument is that models of transformational innovation policies need to incorporate responsible innovation as a goal, as part of what should be accomplished by those policies. And that tech governance means tech governance to help ensure the responsible innovation. But what does technology governance, why? What are the particular rationales? Technology governance can help anticipate and mitigate social and political disruptions around science and technology. They promote safety, security, and democratic risk management. They hopefully address technology divides and rising inequalities. They hopefully promote public trust and public acceptance of S&T. And they, in theory, can help achieve a better alignment of technology development and societal goals. And with the latter, you'll recognize a consonance with the notion of goal-driven innovation. And the argument here is that governance tools are actually an important piece of that equation, but that often get lost or overlooked. Well, technology governance has been on the international agenda and on the OECD agenda at quite a high level. Ministers have declared that advances in technology have to be shaped responsibly through effective governance to ensure their benefits are distributed equitably and the risks are successfully managed. That was in 2021. And just recently in 2022, the launch of the Global Forum on Technology, in fact, this year in 2023, in June, also a commitment to having multi-stakeholder, high-level dialogues about technology governance and the need to have international approaches. At the OECD, in our line of work, we use a definition that goes back to the Outlook, STI Outlook publication of 2018, to a chapter on technology governance and the innovation process. And there is defined technology governance as the process of exercising political and economic administrative authority in the development, diffusion, and operation of technology in societies. And this can be around government activities, but also the activities of firms, civil society organizations, and other communities of practice. And this can entail norms, regulations, standards, and customs, but also work in physical and virtual architectures that can manage risks and benefits and structure people's lives. So just think about ICANN and domain names and how they're structured being a kind of virtual infrastructure of governance. So we can have physical infrastructure and virtual infrastructure. And taken in total, it's the sum of the many ways in which individuals and organizations shape technology and how, conversely, technology shapes social order. Now, there are well-known challenges in the governance of technology. There's a mismatch between the pace of tech development and the adaptivity of governance frameworks. There's the increasing convergence of technologies, which leads to an erosion of traditional disciplinary and regulatory lines. There's fragmentation of governance approaches across administrative boundaries and jurisdictions, despite the fluid and cross-border nature and effects of innovation impeding governance, and uncertainty in potential directions and impacts of innovation, and also just the growing public distrust in expertise and institutions, you might say. So we have to somehow overcome these challenges and develop a system of governance that is well adapted to the fast pace of technology. Well, the framework that we're developing, that we'll be bringing internally to the Committee on Scientific and Technological Policy in a few weeks, aims to do three things to help bring forth transformational technologies. The idea is that this framework should actually help drive innovation and bring them forth, but also to guide members to better anticipate and address ad hoc governance challenges across emerging tech, and help innovation actors to develop longer-term capacities for responsible innovation. So not just applying a framework to a single new technology, but trying to get countries to think about the need to build the necessary societal capacities that create a long-term ability to deal with new technologies. The framework deals with emerging technologies, which we mention evolution, and we give examples of gene editing and synthetic biology, generative AI, immersive tech, like the metaverse and quantum technologies. The framework illustrates how responsible governance practices can be incorporated into decision-making for emerging technologies. So again, why emerging tech? This is where governments and other catalytic actors have particular influence on the speed and trajectory of tech. And work on governance, tech governance, is more common on the later stages of the development of tech, issues of post hoc regulation rather than how we govern through the innovation process. The framework has 5 parts: an intro, and then the core sections on values, design considerations, action pathways. We talk about appraising and assessing technology for policy, embedding values upstream in the innovation process, engaging society and stakeholders, and developing guidelines and regulations. And here, just again, to make the point that just as one of the core elements of how transformative innovation policies are imagined to be changing the norm, the idea of multiple actors is very much embedded in this framework, and how different kinds of actors should be involved in technology development. Framework development came out of a kind of inductive method of looking at existing OECD guidance on emerging tech governance as a primary source, as well as statements, OECD high-level statements of value, as well as OECD analytical work and other kinds of guidance from relevant institutions and experts. So these are the 3 recommendations that were primary material: one on artificial intelligence, one on responsible innovation in neurotechnology, and one on agile regulatory governance to harness innovation. I should also mention that the 3rd of these recommendations has come out of the Regulatory Policy Committee in the Public Governance Directorate. And this project really is a co-production of a multi-sectoral team at the OECD that spans committees in STI, science, tech, innovation, governance, responsible business conduct, and the strategic foresight unit at the OECD. So as I mentioned, the main framework structures are on values, which are high-level ethical considerations, cultural and professional norms, and shared commitments. Design considerations, which are intermediary guidance and a middle layer that can help shape policies and actions necessary for responsible innovation. And action pathways, sequences of policy action tool sets that can help advance the process of developing responsible innovation. So again, just to be clear, the idea here is that that technology governance is a means of creating the kind of responsible innovation process that we'd like to see, and that's necessary as part of a transformational picture of STI policy. On values, we talk in general about how values might operate or should operate in the system, that they should be reflected through the technology life cycle, not merely be an aspirational initial statement. They should be used to enable and encourage responsible practices and to limit or restrict irresponsible ones. They are constitutive. They are moral and political basis for the priorities and trade-offs that are a feature of all governance decisions. And they're combinatorial. It's their joint use that is the approach described for achieving responsible innovation. So continuous, dynamic, constitutive, and combinatorial. The values that we lay out as foundational values are derived from a mixture of the sources that we talked about. High-level values, especially from OECD vision statements and vision statements issued by the OECD Council, the member countries themselves. And the technology specific ones looking more at individual technology guidance that we've seen at the OECD and elsewhere. I won't go through each of these or define these, but just want to highlight individual liberty, democratic values, human rights, environmental sustainability, equity, inclusion as foundational, and specific ones around trust, stewardship, safety and security, innovation for good, fair access, transparency, and responsiveness as being technology-specific ones. I'm not going to go through these just in the interest of time. I think they're to some extent self-explanatory, but needless to say, we will welcome your comments on the draft as they go through committees and certainly in the comment period of this session. Next layer is are the key considerations. That these are characteristics or qualities of the governance system that are necessary to address some of the challenges that we laid out for governance. And these have to do with alignment, anticipation, iteration, agility, inclusivity, and engagement with stakeholders. I'll go through these quickly. In terms of alignment, the idea is you have to align tech development with institutional and social values to maximize benefits of innovation, produce more support among stakeholders and in society. This again relates closely to missions and goal-driven S&T policy. Anticipatory, with the potential disruptive or transformative technology fields, a forward-looking anticipatory approach is required. They enable the upstream identification of desirable futures and future outcomes, potential risks, risk-benefit trade-offs, and dilemmas. Iterative, that iterative governance encourages a learning approach to governance as actors revisit choices and decisions. It avoids the phenomenon of lock-in thinking, where decisions are regarded as settled regardless of the presence of new information. And some of these, again, some of these ideas come out of both the innovation literature, but also good or better regulation literature. And I think one of the potential utilities of the framework is it really tries to bring together those two communities and set of interests around better governance for technology. So agility also Inclusivity, we talk about both in terms of inclusive access to technology, but also inclusion in the development of technology. So the co-creation aspect. Engagement with stakeholders in society, because they can surface societal goals at different points in the innovation system, identify public sensitivities before they become divisive, and promote public understanding of science and technology. Finally, a little bit more on international cooperation, because this is the bread and butter, as you could say, of the OECD, and relevant to this setting of trying to bring international approaches or voices. As we said, so international cooperation is another design element that good technology governance has to promote, in part because of this cross-jurisdictional character of technology flows. This means that national governments need to take international technology policy and governance seriously and engage, and that international cooperation can grow around shared values and the sharing of tools and good practices, and these in turn can guide national approaches. And this is, I guess, a rationale for doing tech governance at a place like the OECD, among others. And therefore, we see four main roles where this plays out. We think this implies the need to coordinate and collaborate on research and tech development where possible, and that long-term development of long-term cross-national expertise would flow out of that and be important. Building a common evidence base, so facilitating the aggregation of relevant data and risks, costs, and impacts of emerging technology. This means developing common taxonomies, internationally comparable metrics to measure research development and deployment, and gather the evidence base to assess progress in the implementation of governance. Dialogue, to promote dialogue in international fora, for example, the new OECD Global Forum on Technology, which aims to foster evidence-based international cooperation informed by external expertise and initiatives on topics at the forefront of global digital and technological policy debate. And standard setting, governments and stakeholders should promote the development of multi-stakeholder consensus-driven standards for regulatory science and interoperable and trustworthy emerging technologies. This is, I think, in some ways the key concept of the framework, which is that we have to move from values and even these design considerations to actual actions. And we grouped a series of kinds of actions, of sequences of policy action that we're calling pathways, which, if taken together in a kind of interrelated process, along with the process of technology development, can constitute the kinds of governance that would promote ultimately responsible innovation. And these four pathways are appraising technology for policy, embedding values upstream, engaging stakeholders and society, and developing guidelines and regulation. So the framework goes through these four and talks about them as iterative, process-based approaches to technology governance. I'll talk about them in series. I'll talk more about the appraising technology because originally I was asked to say something in particular about technology assessment. So I'll say a little bit more about that one. So pathway one is appraising technology for policy. By this, we mean a multifaceted process to understand the emerging technology domain, its potential directions, its possible ethical, social aspects, and potential impacts and risks. It requires both a set of tools and a general capacity in societies. And a key function is to involve stakeholders, and it's not to involve decision-making itself, but to provide strategic intelligence to understand an emerging field and inform decision-making, for knowing when, who, and what policy options should be applied at a given particular technology case, and when certain levels of governance or tools might be triggered. And we see 3 appraisal stages, a horizon scanning phase, a stage, which is sort of a broad scan for emerging tech signals, a preliminary diagnosis stage, and a more of a deep dive appraisal stage. I'm going to skip over the horizon scanning phase for interest of time to outline what I think is one of the more novel tools here, which is to identify criteria of potential societal concern around emerging technology, and that this should be the basis of a preliminary diagnosis of the kinds of next steps officials or innovators might take. We located risk, uncertainty, governance gaps, strategic importance or relevance, pace of technological emergence, and the degree of social license as key criteria for doing this diagnosis. We've played with the idea of having spider diagrams. We're not quite there yet in terms of looking at how technologies compare, and to try to look at when certain kinds of technologies require a deeper kind of governance approach. Then we have a set of tools for deeper dive appraisal, which I won't go through in detail, but which we do in the framework, trying to distinguish subtleties across horizon scanning, forecasting, foresight, technology assessment, and early stage risk assessment, which we say all are important tools for this appraisal. And then much less detail on other pathways. The second one, embedding values upstream in technology development. Here, the idea is governance actually operates not as an end of pipe function, but can be important in shaping the trajectory of technology further upstream in the technology development process. And that there are a number of levers during the technology development process where actors and governance action could come in. The ones I've marked in red are ones that I think are very resonant with the themes that Hideaki already mentioned around some of the challenge-driven and innovative policies that are being developed now. Orienting R&D, building collaborative platforms and co-creation spaces, which involves this multiple actor idea. Interdisciplinary technology development, which we see as a really important modality or pathway in terms of embedding values into technology development. So social sciences, humanities, and sciences together. By design governance approaches in building in values into technology design, and stewardship principles in the process of technology transfer. And in former work, we talked, BNCT has some work on collaborative platforms for convergence, for converging technologies, where we describe convergent spaces that bring together technologies, diverse actors, and diverse disciplines as a way of driving forward responsible innovation. Pathway 3 is engaging stakeholders in society. I won't spend too much time here, other than to say we draw a distinction between 2 kinds of actors, publics and citizens, which are a general population that contributes to democratic decision-making but may lack direct connection to technology developments, and stakeholders, people with direct professional or personal interest in technology development or its outcomes. The rationale for involving these different stakeholders is different, and that's important in designing, I think, a good governance approach. The success factors have been kind of collected through a lot of experience in the community of the LC community, and we really owe a lot to building on experiences of these studies and this work to lay out some kind of good practices, success factors. And the other thing we do in the framework is create a kind of taxonomy of kinds of engagement, engagement policies and activities. One around the need to build deliberative capacity in society for engagement and deliberation, doing things like education programs, informational repositories, inclusive community building, media and communication training, and collective foresight exercises. But then there are two other modes, one more around consulting and communicating with stakeholders and publics, and a third really about co-creating agendas, co-creating through citizen science, through participatory technology assessment, fab labs, living labs, etc. So bringing together these three modes. And finally, a pathway on developing guidelines and regulations. And here we try to bring together learning from the good governance community with the tech governance community to emphasize the need for agile and adaptive systems that combine both binding and non-binding approaches that are serious about thinking about enforcement and evaluation, where trade-offs and opportunity costs are considered, and which must, with key characteristics, build and improve the robust evidence base, and be learning and experimentational in approach. And there are some good examples of experimentation going on in regulatory process. And for this, we again lay out some tools and kinds of governance tools, and particular some success factors in designing governance for responsible innovation. With that, I will cease the presentation and thank you very much for your attention.
デイビッドさん、どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, David. We are just discussing, they are just discussing responsible innovation in OEDC as we speak. So this was the introduction of the framework for new emerging texts. There are 4 components. The first one is values, which is the foundation. And another is governance design considerations. And he listed a number of elements for the design considerations. And for the actual transformation into action, as pathway, we have transformation assessment, embedding of values, and the involvement of stakeholders, and guidelines and regulations formulation. So that's what he has explained. Regarding facts, does anybody have any questions on the facts from the floor?
The framework that you have presented now, how is this going to be, is this now currently being developed and it's not fixed yet, or and how is it going to be used? What's the outcome of this framework? How is it going to be used within the OECD and also the national governments?
Great, thanks for the question. On the first question, yes, it's still very much under development. This is the first draft that comes out of other work that we've done, but it's the first time that we've tried to put together the different pieces to create a kind of general framework on emerging tech. The idea is we want ideally countries and other innovation actors to use this as new, to both build kind of the kinds of capacities that the framework calls for, that facilitate these pathways, but also sort of more directly apply to particular technology cases. So perhaps the framework could help countries plan their own policy pathway around the development of good governance of that technology. So we see science policymakers, we see ministries, we see private sectors. There's guidance for private sector actors that I didn't get to. And within the OECD, this will be, I think, could possibly be considered at the Global Forum on Technology as and discussed there potentially. And otherwise, we'll see what kind of resonance it has with countries like Japan and others, and see if it's useful and see how we can make it more useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So with that, I'd like to move on to the next speaker. Thank you, David, for the wonderful presentation. Okay, so 次の
We'd like to move into the next speaker. This is a final keynote lecture, Dr. Wolfgang Polt. He is Director of Policies, Institute for Economic, Social, and Innovation Research, Joanneum Research. Dr. Polt, please share with us your screen.
In a presentation mode, perhaps? Oh, it's... Can you hear me? あ、すみません。電源が落ちてしまったようなので、
We just received the information that the communication is cut off. So during this time, maybe we could discuss some of the things that has been taken up. Are there anything that you found really interesting? Dr. Shiroyama, please. Or maybe we can discuss this with somebody else. Dr. Yoshioka, yes. I'd like to go back to Dr. Winickoff's presentation and the framework. I found it really interesting about the innovation. And I think you are dealing with the variety of innovations, especially the disruptive innovation. Sometimes it is difficult for the society to accept destructive technologies. It sometimes happens. And when it is not accepted, then in that situation, the suppliers that will be needed would be involved. And with the innovation, some people may benefit, but still they just reject it because they don't want to change their attitude or behavior. So in the innovation area, it's something well known. And for that, you have the very forward-looking and participatory approaches. So you have emphasized this, and that means that you are able to learn from your past experiences, and you are striking a very good balance or walking a very fine line, and you are also paying attention to the engagement. And this is very much about innovation management. This is based on your deep knowledge. Thank you very much for filling the gap. Dr. Polt is back.
Terribly sorry for having problems here, but my laptop did not load and is out of battery.
Okay, and
so
it's fine now?
No, I connected now via my tablet.
Then perhaps we can share your presentation?
Yes, that would be great. I was going to ask you that.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for helping me out on this.
Okay. まず、事務局の方では、はい、シェアしていただきます。
So we shared your presentation material. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I think it is a very timely issue, and I would like to convey to you some experiences and the bumpy road, if I may call it this way, of applying a new form of mission-oriented approach that is the transformative one in the European policy context. European meaning both on the level of the European Union as well as on some national states. Remind you that this is really a difference. Next slide, please. I will not go very much into detail about the concept of missions. I think Professor Shiroyama summarized it so nicely, and there is nothing much to add except for pointing to a very important difference between the older type of mission-oriented projects. For example, they originated from nuclear technologies, from defense, from aerospace programs, and the new type of mission-oriented project, which started from the support to environmentally sustainable development, but in terms of topics have expanded considerably beyond that. As you see from the discussion, from the citation I give, this is a discussion that has been going on for quite some while. So in the early 1990s, there were the first conceptualizations of that. And what we are now experiencing, at least at the European level, and thanks again to Professor Shiroyama for labeling Europe as the center of an experiment, you see that it takes quite some time for policy concepts to diffuse, to become accepted, and to be translated into actual policy. And that's exactly where we stand now. We are in an experimental phase, and I'm here to share the first observations and the first results of this experiment on the European level with you. Next slide. I'm not going to go into that. It's just reiterating that we have seen several layers of approaches to technology policy. Actually, science, technology, and innovation policy started as classic mission-oriented approaches, which was, to paraphrase again the words that have been used already, big science deployed to big problems. And that was behind the development of nuclear weapons, as well as the moonshot approach, the infamous ones. And these types of policies are relevant until today, but they have very different design principles, and they have very different challenges for governance as the new missions that you see on the upper right corner of the graph, which are much more diverse, of a much larger scope, probably also in terms of time span, and certainly in the number of actors and governance layers that are involved. Next slide. And recent policy research on the type of transformative mission-oriented policy has basically distinguished between two types of missions. The one we call accelerator type, which is basically focusing on a more narrow goal, that is to achieve scientific breakthroughs or technological breakthroughs. These two types of accelerator missions still have different rationale, different demand for governance, but they are certainly distinct from the transformer type of mission, as we have come to call them, which addresses larger system failures, the transformation of whole systems, and even sometimes societal behavior. And while the demand for governance in terms of bringing different actors together, communicating and channeling resources across silos in governments or across layers of governance is already high in the accelerator type of mission. It is even far more so in the transformer type of mission. Next one. We have tried to analyze in a forthcoming paper that Matthias Weber and myself have written to characterize these two different types of missions. And I think it's fair to say that the transformative missions have much greater difficulty in defining clear targets and time horizons. Often the goals are formulated much less concrete than you would have in accelerator type of missions. For example, develop a vaccine for a pandemic in the next year or so, which is a very concrete target. While the targets and the formulation of targets by policy with respect to the transformative missions are very often of a nature that needs further concretization, even though they address very important problems. And the management approach and the range of actor, of course, are very different in the type of accelerator missions. You can set more or less stringent roadmaps. You can have more or less a planning type project management approach, while in the transformative missions with their very long time spans, you have to have more open-minded, more experimental, and more adaptive management structures. Because to put just one of these transformative type of missions that European countries have pursued in the past decades, the change of their energy system, this is apparently a process that we're talking about decades instead of years. And in these decades, both technological conditions change, relative prices and market conditions change. And this all has influence on the ends as well as on the means of mission-oriented policies. And you need a kind of agile and reflective government that can incorporate these changes, can translate them again into reformulated targets, can shore up political support for this change in targets, and that is not an easy task in no political environment. But we're talking, as becomes very apparent, of a very different type of management approach. And the same goes, of course, for the range of actors in terms of transformative missions. If you speak of changing your energy system, changing your transport system, it is not a solely government-led approach. It cannot be, but it must involve basically whole of government as well as society. If society is hesitant to follow the path, remind you that one of the major ingredients of the success of transformative mission is behavioral change on a large scale, like how we commute, what types of energy we use. If this is not in line with the policy, it's very likely that these types of policies will fail. Next one. This is just to give you some examples, some of which are historic, some of which are recent, of the types of missions. I'm not going into this in greater detail, so probably the next one. I like to think of policy as a rational process where well thought out concepts are being translated into actions and then meticulously implemented. And of course, this should be the benchmark against we measure the reality, but we all know it doesn't really work that way. And likewise, I'm afraid that from what I heard, in terms of reading the documents, how we conceptualize policy in the European Union, they give a bit of a too rosy picture in that they come across as being very rational processes. Professor Shiroyama has alluded to the structures that are described in the European documents. And I would shed some light on how this is being translated into reality and where the challenges and problems in translating these policy concepts and governance structures into reality lie. And I have two different empirical backgrounds, or rather three, one of which was a study that we did about the same time as Mariana Mazzucato wrote her 2018 piece that supported the introduction of the missions into the European Framework Program. And what we did on behalf of the European Commission at this time was we went back in history, we screened several hundred mission-oriented policies, programs, and approaches in the past. And we tried to distill success factors. And this is the list we came up with. And I'm briefly going through it, and because it's the benchmark against which we have to measure the current missions, their design, and their implementation. The first observation was that if a mission is to be successful, it has to include the application and diffusion of technology. It cannot solely rely on the creation of a new technology or the creation of new knowledge. In the same vein, it has to include social innovation, that is changing behavior of groups of society, sometimes even society as a whole, in order to be successful, especially when it comes to transformative types of missions. It has to ensure that there is a coherent application of instruments and means, commonly called the policy mix. This is very important because quite often governments have launched programs or created regulations or set incentives in terms of one type of behavior, but at the same time, they have installed conflicting or even contradicting policy measures that would run counter to the original goal of the specific mission. For example, you can have a country where they would support the decarbonization of transport, but at the same time, they would subsidize fuel consumption by different means. Obviously, this is in contradiction and would not qualify as a coherent application of instruments and means. They must have built reflexive mechanisms because as the environment changes, context changes, and policy has to be able to reflect to this and take up these changes and build it into reformulation of goals, rearrangement of instruments, bringing in new stakeholder groups and what you have. And now we come to I think that's the sine qua non of a successful transformative mission-oriented policy, it needs a strong political ownership. We did not find successful examples of missions in history which have not had support from high-level political areas and which are not implemented with a strong operational and political governance. I'm emphasizing this because a lot of the missions that we are talking about today and we are trying to implement, I can speak of Europe authoritatively, but I think this is all, the case all over the place in the world. If you don't have that strong political ownership, and if you don't install strong operational and political governance, there is a risk of mission creep or mission dissipation, and you will end up with diluted results. When it comes to transformative type of missions, you need the widespread buy-in of actors, and all these requirements taken together ask for a mission-oriented innovation policy to be a substantial overhaul of existing governance and policy capacities. And that is one of the success prerequisites that turns out to be one of the major barriers and challenges at the very time of implementation of European missions as we speak, both on the level of the European Commission as well as on the level of member states. Next slide. It has been alluded to that the European Union in the current framework program of research, which is by some measures the largest one in the world, it's called Horizon Europe. It runs until 2030. It started 2021. And one major part, not the sole part, but one major part of this program is our policy approaches of the mission-oriented type. In themselves, they are not quite homogeneous. For example, the mission on cancer, which has the target to improve the lives of 3 million people through prevention, cure, and care, is much more of a science-driven mission and is closer in its characteristics, not completely so, but largely so, to an accelerator type of mission, although it contains elements of transformative change as well. While the other missions are more of the transformative type. When you think of climate actions, you know that you have to involve many stakeholders. The same goes for missions. And you see the targets that the European Union has set itself listed here. But the mission itself, the European Commission itself, has only very limited tools to implement these goals, these missions. It can only do so by seeing these goals and missions translated into national objectives, measures, and impact. The sole or one of the major instruments that is on the Commission level, that is on the level of the whole of Europe, is the framework program, which is basically funding research in these areas. When it comes to translate these goals into national actions, it is the national and sometimes the regional governments that are in the driving seat. They have to design actions which translate this, or they don't. And hence, the existence of mission boards or mission managers on the European level should not lead you to believe that there is a strong steering capacity on the European level. Rather, it is trying to incentivize the national member states and sometimes the region. When you think of soil, of water, of cities, you immediately see that lower levels of government are addressed to a good extent. But the Commission as such, the European Commission, does not have very much steering capacity. Next one. Next one. To improve the steering capacity of the Commission, as well as to allow the member states to learn from each other and to compare and try to improve in mutual learning, there are some instruments available on the European level. And one of the instruments I have the honor and privilege to coordinate. It's a project which runs for 2 years, that is in the initial phase of the mission implementation, and that is called TRAMI. It's an acronym that stands for Transnational Cooperation on the Mission Approach. And one of the tasks of this project was to feed back the observation that we see on the regional and national level in terms of implementation of missions. And what you see here is a wrap-up of our experiences of the first 1.5 years of implementation of missions in Europe. And I would briefly go with you through them. The first observation is that the mission readiness, as we've called it, that is the starting capacity of a country to adopt these approaches. These are very demanding ones in terms of governance capabilities, is very unevenly distributed among the European countries. Some regions and countries have already government structures in place or are developing those. Others are only about to start thinking about what good governance structures could be. So that gives you an idea on how lengthy such processes from the European level to the national or regional level are in terms of diffusion and implementation. What is also to be seen is you cannot really single out one best practice model, but here the national trajectories of the political systems matter. Some countries, for example, have a centralized approach, some that is an approach that is probably quite familiar to you in Japan, because I think you have an equally coordinated and top-down approach on the level of central government. This is not the case in some of the advanced European countries. They have an approach where an implementing agency is being given a huge role in designing and implementing the policies. So there are different models around how missions are being implemented, and a lot of opportunity to learn from these differences, but it's also quite difficult then to align them. That would be the next great challenge for the current phase of implementation of European missions, is the alignment of goals and of instruments and of governance structure. Let's start with the goals. For example, the European Union has set out goals to have 100 carbon neutral cities in the year 2035, I think, or 40. And this mission did not arrive on the European soil out of the blue, because very many countries had already existing policies which had set different goals time-wise. So the translation of European goals into national ones was a bit of a bumpy affair, because some countries said, we invested a lot in forging these targets, we are not going to change them. So there are pre-existing strategies, various sorts, various levels of development, and only over time they will converge, and they will only converge if the European framework for setting up the missions will remain in place over a long time, so that there is a policy incentive for such an alignment. And the next observation, I think this is true, and this is especially pertinent when we talk about science, technology, and innovation policy. Mission-oriented policies, as they are addressing societal challenges, need to go beyond STI policy. They need whole-of-government approaches, and quite often, and this is hard to swallow for a science minister or an education minister or a research minister, the driver's seat sometimes has to be occupied by another ministry. When you talk about soil or water, it might be an agricultural ministry. If you talk about cities, the level would even be the city level. And it should certainly go beyond, it should certainly avoid the policy trap. So far, we are still very much in the implementation phase in Europe, talking policy between experts and policymakers. And we're talking governance structures. But transformative policies, to be successful, cannot remain on these levels. And the involvement of business and citizens has to be strengthened in the individual missions. So far, only in a few examples, like the cities mission, businesses and citizens have been involved to some extent. This is still an open world for many of the other missions. Next one. So the governance challenges that we observe today in practice is that of policy coordination. In Europe, this is even more difficult than in any nation state, because you would have to address yet one more government level. The governance between the horizontal and the sectoral policies. It's also the vertical governance between the ministries and the implementation agencies. And of course, the different instruments that you use in the policy mix over time to be coherently employed. This is a huge challenge. Also, it's something that governments are grappling with, is whether they should use existing structures that they have for policy, or whether there is a need to build new ones. For example, in Germany, the proposal has been made to establish missions, dedicated mission agencies. This is in discussion, and we will only see in the next few years how existing structures, that is mainly what by the means by which we're trying to implement the missions so far, are capable of absorbing this this policy approach. The definition of clear targets versus the open-endedness of some of the problems I have alluded to already, and the balancing of bottom-up experimentation, because very often you go different routes, different avenues, which in the end then turn out to be dead ends or less successful than others, because new technological options come up, new societal demands arise. And the top-down goal-oriented guidance and planning is a major governance challenge that we see in the current phase of implementation. Next one. So what would be ways ahead, and we are actually discussing is, as we are speaking, just the other day, the interim assessment of the missions came out, of the first 2 years of implementation of missions on the European level. And just tomorrow, we will have an event of the European Mission Network to discuss these assessment results. and the guidance that the European Commission has given in its recent communication. Basically, the communication says it's too early to assess the missions in their effectiveness. We have to be patient. We have to stay on track. We have to learn from the experiences that we have made in the last 2 years, mainly concerning what can be improved in terms of governance. And there is a lot to be improved, especially when it comes to establishing a whole of government approach. The Commission in this respect is probably even more advanced than many member states. My own country, Austria, is also embarking on a very elaborate governance structure, but a great number of countries are not as of yet. But what we need certainly is to ensure that there is institutional capacity building in the governance agencies and on the level of policy making, because this at the moment is really a strong bottleneck for the implementation. If you don't have the manpower, the intellectual resources, the financial resources, this will not fly. And we are at the moment at various levels still grappling with getting the budgets on the national and regional levels together to match the European funding or even go beyond it. And finally, you have seen from these 5 missions that the European Union has launched, they are all very important topics. But only some of them, only for some of them, there is really a sense of urgency strong enough to ignite political action. For example, in Austria, we have cleaned our rivers and lakes years ago, so there is not much sense of urgency when it comes to some of the goals and targets that the European Mission on Waters and Oceans has. While others we still have on the policy agenda, this is not true for each and every of the goals. And this is same for other countries with respect to other missions. So for missions in the future to really make a huge impact, to be seen and to be recognized as an important and necessary policy approach, they should reflect a sense of urgency. And I'm sure we will see missions related to European defense, to energy crisis, or what you have coming up. There are some discussions in this vein, and I'm certain that we will see new missions that would answer to this sense of urgency once it had leveled on the European level a policy agreement among the member states. Next one. And that's about it. If you have any questions with respect to the project, this TRAMI project, I'm more than eager to answer it. Just drop me an email or visit our website. I can provide you, but maybe in the annex of my presentation, there are a few slides I will not show. It might be already given. So thanks, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
はい、ポルトさんどうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Dr. Polt. In your presentation, you talked about 2 different kinds of missions, accelerator type and transformer type. There are 2 different kinds of missions. And you talked about the comparison between the 2, and then you focused on the transformative mission, and then you talked about the kind of the secret for the successes for the transformer type missions. If you try to engage yourself in the transformative missions, you have to deal with uncertainties. So there could be a change of the target, or there is a need for reframing of the target. So governance style for this, it should be reflective and agile. So these are needed. And also for the mission-oriented research, you talked about the past experiences. And based on that, it is important to have high-level top the political support in implementing the mission, it is important to have the ownership of the political arena. And also, you talked about TRAMI. This is what the Dr. Polt is leading. This is a program that you introduced. And here, there could be many, you were able to learn a great deal in implementing TRAMI. And for the transformative mission, then not only the government, but also not only the STI policy, but also you have to engage the general public and the businesses. So you have to change the scope for that. There is nothing that we can say as the best practice, but still you are able to learn a great deal from other parties and other engagements. Thank you so much. And I think we are able to take questions from the floor or from the online participants. Are there any questions related to the facts? So in the question box, we have a very good question. This is not necessarily about the fact-finding, but maybe we could pick this up in the discussion session. So I'd like to leave this as it is now. About your, are there any questions, especially focusing on the facts? If not, well, time is running short, so we'd like to move into the comment part. Dr. Polt, thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for the presentation. それでは会場の方に戻って
Now we'd like to move back to the venue. So moving back to the venue, the next up is Ms. Kurata from the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, MEXT, Science and Technology Policy Bureau, Research and Development Division, Strategic Planning Director. Thank you very much. My name is Kurata from MEXT. Earlier, the three speakers talked about the changes in the past for the policies as well as opportunities and challenges. And there were lots of implications. Thank you very much. And my workplace, Science and Technology Policy Bureau, is the MEXT's government center to manage all the research institutions. But other than that, we have the Moonshot project. We are also covering that project together with JST. So in my previous division, I have similar experiences. So I like to talk on those topics today. And today, as Dr. Shiroyama mentioned earlier, the SISTI and the Cabinet Office are the central government entities, but we should talk about the issues and challenges from the fields and the private sectors. And also internationally, there are some common issues. Those are the issues that I would like to focus today in my presentation, rather than the central government's points of view. First of all, for the Moonshot. Sorry, I want to use my slides. Could you go to the next page? Yes. So regarding Moonshot research, there are 9 goals that we have defined at MEXT. Well, we cover 1, 2, 3, and so forth, and 8 and 9 as well. So the targets for the society as well as the robots enabler. So those are social problem solutions as well as technology solutions. So there's a mixture of those. And both emerging technologies are used in some of the goals. So there is a mixture of what we are trying to do among what Shiroyama sensei talked about. We started this program. When we set those goals, I was involved the discussions were not so simple. We had to go back and forth. So setting goals for this project itself was very challenging. And today, the program is not perfect yet in terms of those goals. There was lots of twists and turns in the history. So rather than today, I want to talk about the challenges for the future. If you could go back to the previous slide. Yes. One of the pillars is the framing and of issues and the missions to put onto the table, as well as intelligence. Intelligence function. There are different elements in this, and some of them are listed here, like science and technology-oriented mission, or social problem solution-oriented missions, whichever that is the case. When I'm in the government, there is a limit of budget, so we have to prioritize on some important ones. Given that, how we can decide on the priority? We need evidence and data for such a decision-making, and decision-making criteria, and so forth. Sometimes those are not clear in advance. That's why it takes time for making decisions, or even after the decision. As I will touch upon later, we have to do the evaluation, and the evaluation is affected by the lack of clarity in priorities or judgment criteria. So in the mission-oriented or social problem-solving projects, the issues are very complex, and there are many parties involved from different ministries and agents. Therefore, judgment criteria or standards, how can we set them and share among the stakeholders? That's the problem that we are tackling in our bureau. We are working on this very issue at the moment, and I hope that we can have opportunities to discuss these issues internationally. So for social problem solution or technology-oriented projects, whichever the case, technological development is proceeding at a very fast pace. Therefore, earlier there was a discussion on the technology assessment, but the question is how we can identify the signs and anticipate the issues in advance. So at an early stage, how can we promote discussions? There was some examples from OECD, which was very interesting. So in Japan, those are the things that we should have discussion on going forward. And also earlier, there was an example of EU, but for the relationship with the existing projects or businesses, that is also important. So in terms of portfolio analysis, I don't know whether this is the right name or not. Sometimes there's a lack of visibility or transparency for some other stakeholders, or when there are research subjects included, so it's very diverse. So the scoping is important, and how to bring a transparency is an issue. Dashboard may be one solution recently, but those are very important issues for Japan as well. In the Moonshot project, there was a LC subcommittee so that we can have cross-cutting discussions in terms of risk analysis and collaboration among stakeholders. So how did it work in the past? We have to go back and evaluate the past developments. In terms of evaluation, when I'm with the central government policy making, because we use the public budget decisions and provide support, sometimes short-term outcome is being sought for. For example, how many papers were written and so forth. But that's the tendency. However, the original purpose of the project is something we have to always keep in mind so that we can set the right social project and do the monitoring and do the tracking of the outcome and the progress. Well, that's another area where we don't have a sufficient system yet. We need more discussions. So there are so many things we have to do, but on the other hand, when we look at the talent to do that, promote these discussions, we don't have the enough talent and capabilities. So we need more project management talent. That is a very old issue that we have been talking about, but the talent issue is still serious. And as was mentioned, connecting different ministries and agencies, we need talent to do that. So the people who know the practice is very important on top of the experts. Especially in Japan and also in the EU, maybe the organizations are different and talent structure is different. But in Japan, these are the problems. The last area is local versus global. Well, today we didn't explain, but in Japan, I'm sure that Yamada-san will explain later. There is a COI program by MEXT and COE. And this is the program promoted by central and local governments. The vision is the ideal state in the future, and the local governments and universities are working together to promote such vision of the society. And MEXT is supporting this. So this is different from an EU mission or a moonshot because these are not dictated by the national government. It's set by local governments with the academics. So earlier there was a discussion on the relationship between the top level and the regional government, but this kind of bottom-up approach, how can we ensure the balance between top-down and bottom-up? This is something that we want to verify and discuss in the future. Last point is about the international cooperation, EU soil project and the Japanese moonshot. There may be possible collaboration. We discussed it in the past. However, the positioning of each project may be different. Therefore, we couldn't deepen the discussion enough in the past. So in that sense, we need the talent who can coordinate these efforts, and also mutual understanding may be needed. So that was my quick remarks from a person who was involved in the practice. So these issues are not unique only in Japan. I'm sure that this is common to other countries as well. So I hope that we can have some discussions around these themes later. Yes, thank you very much. So from a person in actual practice, she talked about the intelligence in setting the themes, and also we need non-short-term evaluation criteria, and also in terms of talent, we need a talent who can bridge between different projects and organizations. And in terms of local and global, in collaboration efforts, there may be some differences in assumptions and the presumptions. So exchanging information among different countries is important. Next is Oyamada-san from CRDS, Japan Science and Technology Agency. Oyamada-san, floor is yours, please.
Thank you for your introduction. My name is Oyamada. I'm from CRDS JST. This is the title of the comment. To start with, why is it that I was invited? I think this is reflected in the agenda items. In the last several years, there have been discussion about this issue in the OECD, and I have been participating in the OECD projects, which are concerning the STI and innovation especially. And they try to work on the STI policies based on the changes of the environment and surroundings. So various discussions are taking place. And today we have the transformative implementing transformative STI policy and future challenges in Japan and abroad. I think there are two different implications for the transformative STI policy. And this is the transformative STI policy to bring about changes in the society. This is one thing, which is the demand of the society itself. In order to deal with this demand, STI innovation policy itself should change. So transformation of the STI policy itself is important. So there are two different meanings or implications here. Please take a look at this. This is the report, the biannual, the report, and please take a look at the names of the chapters. This is the 2023 version, and the kind of topics covered by two experts participating here from abroad are shown here on the chapter 5 and 6 in red. Within OECD, they try to understand what the transformative STI policy should be. They are discussing this issue, and there are several points of view, and you might want to take a closer look at it. And this is under discussion for the publication, which is scheduled next year. Today we listen to the reports by Dr. Winickoff and Dr. Polt, and I had the opportunity to work with them, and I was lucky to participate in the projects of these two individuals, and I'd like to make a comment based on my own experiences. First is about the emerging technology governance. This issue was taken up by Dr. Winickoff. So we have to cover from the upstream, and then we try to look into the potential changes of the society, impact onto the society, and also the requirements for the values, and the important things should be put into the scope of the innovation. And then we have to have the right direction with the dialogue with the society. This is quite important. In Japan, this is very important. So we have to have the predictive. We have to have we have to tackle problems proactively before they become apparent, and then about the actual the code or maybe values. Sometimes we try to refer to something already there, but I think it is important to start with the sense of values. And also, for the rule making and the social implementation, it is important to have a whole of government approach. So this has been already taken up by the speakers. I think this approach is also the important in Japan. And at the same time, collaboration and participation of the industry, citizens and consumers are important. And also, this is very much conducive to the international close collaboration with the international parties for the realization of norms, rule making, and standardization. There are many emerging technologies, AI, and also the synthetic biology, engineering biology, neurotechnology, and quantum technology. And looking outside of the country, there is a variation depending on the areas. In the case of AI, we have a mixed and also the MIC and also the Cabinet Office, and they've been collaborating with OECD from the very early stage to come up with the rulemaking, and synthetic biology for the biotechnology and bioeconomy. This is related to what we do in Japan, and we are seeing the formation of the communities. And Dr. Matsuo is an expert in this field. So if you have any comments, please, I'd like to invite yours. And then about the neurotechnology within OECD in 2019, they have already issued a recommendation. In Japan, it's different. We have the consortium of the private businesses and also industry organization is there for the LC for the moonshot program has been taken up, and the guidebooks have been already issued. On the other hand, policy framework has not been clearly stated, so it is still untransparent. And quantum technology, I think we are at the verge of starting it. LC Center of Osaka University has been doing, which is quite advanced, and within the Moonshot program, a discussion is now about to take off for the quantum technology. And next is about mission-oriented approach. Starting the turn of the century, starting 2000, we started working on the implementation of the programs to solve social issues. Many of them have been focusing very much on the R&D. So the MEXT and the METI had been the driving force behind it. So they tried to look things from the perspective of technologies. That was the challenge. And also they have been taken up with the 3 to 5 year program and with the support and subsidy from the government. But the things are changing, and they have now shifting to the social changes rather than the solution of the social problems. The government is now aiming for the carbon neutrality, which has been already declared, and GX, the green transformation technologies are presented by the government. Society 5.0 has been continued from the previous 10-year program to the new 10-year program, and we believe this will continue to be so in the years to come. And some of the areas are not necessarily meant for the R&D as a primary goal. And in order to solve the problems, they try to utilize innovations, and in various parts of the society we are seeing this. And also Garden City approach is now being done, and many of the local community has been proactively changing the local community. Against this backdrop, innovation, the policies and STI policies are changing, and as was mentioned by Dr. Shiroyama, we have the Cabinet Office and CSTI. So we have the top-down approaches already taking root, and also the third phase, the STIP, they try to work on the multifaceted utilization of the criteria for social implementation. And earlier, you talked about the duration of the program, 3 years or 5 years. But recently, there has been the adoption or the application of the new program, which should be much longer in phase. So the center of the excellence is the 10-year program. So that means that the visions and also the targets can change. In the case of Moonshot, and we have initially decided that this will take about 15 years. So with the competitive fundraising, we are able to have this kind of approach. So we have been focusing too much on the competition, but now things are changing. And also in terms of fundamentals, some people say that the strengths of the fundamentals are declining, and this move might also further tamper with the situation. And then mission-oriented approach, and simply put, there could be many policies and measures, and so it is important to take inventory for everything we have. We have to look at everything we have at this moment and try to do something new. And if you compare what is being done in Europe, and then we look back into what we are doing, and then maybe we are doing something similar to that of the European community. Dr. Polt talked about whether it makes sense to come up with the mission agency, but in the case of Japan, there are many issues, and for the missions, it is important to have the clear direction with which we are able to have the completion of missions. So this is my personal view, but in order to do that, there could be many things. This has been already taken up. So these are the kind of topics that we are covering in our discussions. I'm not repeating myself, but the last part is important. Ecosystem formation based on regions and integration and coordination of various means within the ecosystem is important. We do have the policy-designated large cities, And so depending on the region, it's different. This should be different, but R&D activities can be drawn onto them, and also innovation promotion programs can be put into their activities. So we are able to have the integration of everything they do so that we have the coherent system to promote innovation. And the government should provide support for that, measure the outcomes, and then we learn from their cases, and then we are able to deploy that learning into other places. That's all for me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Oyamada. You looked back into Dr. Winickoff's presentation centering on OECD, and Dr. Polt's presentation about mission-oriented policies. So Dr. Oyamada is the one who had knowledge about both these two. So you might be the only one who is able to make this kind of a very valid comments. You talked about the challenges of the Japanese innovation, and also about the mission-oriented policy, mission-oriented approach. It is gaining momentum in Japan, so that's something you just mentioned here in your report. And finally, you talked about the regional approach. In Europe, they have the national systems or regional systems, and as was mentioned by Dr. Shiroyama, experiments are conducted, and many experiments are being done on a very diversified ways. And he said that we are actually doing the same thing in Japan in various ways. So there are questions related to this. So maybe we can use this question at the final discussion, since it is a very good question. Thank you very much for your comment. So we'd like to move into the discussion.
ですね、ちょっとたくさんのインプットがありましたので、どうまとめ
There were so many comments we have received. I don't know how to put them together, but there were 2 points, I think, raised, or 3. I would like to identify 3 points. First, this time around, David talked about technology governance, more or less continuation of the existing governance and emerging governance. He talked about the integration of those, and also mentioning responsible innovation. On the other hand, so that is one thing, but the social problem solution is another thing. That is what we need as well. So mission-oriented policy is also a trend, on the other hand. And Polt-san mainly talked about mission-oriented policy. So those 2 major trends, how can we combine and integrate those 2 major trends in our discussions in terms of the construction framework as well as the practice? I think this is an important theme. We don't see that one is more better than the other. It's important to integrate those 2. And another point, the second point, discussion point, is as follows. As was mentioned by Polt-san's discussion, when we talk about mission-oriented policy, there are so many different diverse activities going on at the moment. So from one of the audience members, there was a question. Well, with these various levels of discussions going on at different levels, how can we say that the local or organizations integration, how can we involve all of these players? The last comment by Mr. Oyamada was also about this. He talked about the local areas, not only the national government. How can local governments and communities be involved? So that's the second discussion area. And the third one, I think, was mentioned by all of the speakers. When we try to put the governance into place, how about the institutional capacity and the talent? That was the concern. So for those capabilities and capacities, Well, this is a big question, but what should we do? How can we make sure that we have adequate capacity and build and develop necessary capabilities and capacities? So those are the 3 points. So I would like you to discuss. So each person can pick up any of those 3. So I would like to first ask the keynote speakers to give us a feedback. So can I start with the first person, Shiroyama sensei? Thank you very much. For the first one and second one, I think these two were related. This time we talked about technology governance. On the other hand, we talked about the mission-oriented policy. But technology governance-wise, I don't know whether my understanding is correct or not, but conventional technological development, it is a little bit different from the conventional way, because in the past, we did technological development, and at a later stage, there was a verification process, whether it is okay to continue or not. But rather than that, at an early stage of development stage, an anticipatory process should kick in, so that we can think about the contribution to the society. So technology is the area still, but how we deal with the values is changing from the past. So it's all about technology, but we are shifting our attention more to values and society. I think that's the change in the approach. On the other hand, the mission-oriented programs, well, the textbook definition is that we should define the mission and select the right technology for that. But when you look at different evaluation, and then there were actually different types. So sometimes the missions are clear, but on the other hand, sometimes people focus on technologies and define the missions. So both, I think, are converging into the same goal. So how can we combine and integrate those two? Well, there are different possibilities and potentials, and we have to. That's something we need in practice. Earlier, Matsuo-san introduced the 3 points, but let me give you more concrete ideas. Today in society, we have planetary boundary issue, SDGs and AGC. On the other hand, we have new technologies like related to AI or information technology. So these are not just limited to implementation of technologies. We need a system to activate in the society. We have to think about the social system. And for those, we need to involve various different parties to discuss. So we need both, I think.
On one hand, we have planetary boundaries and SDGs. We start with the problems, but in actuality, we have to start with the technologies, which are the tools. So we have to pay attention to these two sides. And I think the designing of the policy formation is something that is being required. So again, technology is not the only thing we have to look at, but it is not that we only look. It's not that we have to only look at this social standing, and in what way the technologies can be used as a tool. Sometimes we have to be prepared for some negative aspects. That's something we have to work on. One more thing about the capacity-related issue. In my first presentation, I talked about the situation in Japan, mission-oriented program or SYP or moonshot, and top-down approach is done. I focused on this. However, whether it is the functional or not, well, I doubt. We have cabinet office, having a certain amount of money, but the kind of thing that they can do is limited. The amount of money is limited, and the number of personnel is limited. So the point is how we are able to have a good connection with the bottom-up approach or the existing approach. And then you talked about the visualization of the portfolio, Kurata-san, and also in the cabinet office there could be some regulatory reforms. So the connecting all these dots are important. So we could have top-down approach, and we have the command and control system. That's one thing. But maybe it is important to have good connection with many things. So editing of the very different or diversified approaches are important. How are we able to have the bottom-up approaches and have the experience? How are we able to create a career path as in the private sector or maybe public sector? So this is a kind of skill that we need in Japan. That's all for me. Thank you. Thank you very much. You talked about the 3 questions I raised. David, would you like to answer all these 3 questions, or maybe you can focus on just 1 or 2?
Again, how do you square the 2 themes that we've been talking about, and is there a tension on the one hand, and if so, is there what's a resolution of that tension? I think the tension is a little bit illusory. I think there's a tendency in the missions community to, as we've heard, be wary of too much of a tech-focused mission approach, and they see that as something which was characterized kind of an earlier stage of missions approach, and that's itself a little bit in tension with any kind of technology policy, right? That technology policy that's removed from, let's say, social concerns and more about pushing out technology to drive innovation and economy, which we know happens. A lot of that policy happens. Funding is doing that. I think the purpose of the governance framework is to help tell countries and work with countries in all of their investments in technology to say, hey, it has to look more like this conception of responsible innovation, which by definition needs to be, which understands technology as involved and engaged in social innovation at the same time. We can't separate the two, and that we shouldn't be thinking of technological transitions, but socio-technical transitions. So if the framework is doing its job, it's helping orient policymakers, not just within mission communities, but within sort of the broader, S&T universe, to think about technology in a different way, and to think about it more in socio-technical terms. And once we do that, we can see how, in fact, the governance framework that we're trying to develop is very much in line with the conception of technology and the role of technology, I think, that the missions community tend to see. They see it as following the goals, as being community driven or stakeholder driven. And these are precisely the kinds of themes that are raised up in the framework that we're developing, that we need to have agenda definition, goal definition for technological development, with the idea of responsiveness to societal needs is very much a part of that dialogue. So I think they actually work well and are very sympathetic. I think in our framework, I didn't have time to drill down into this, and as a result of this conversation, it's going to make me go back to this lever, one of the levers we have in one of the pathways, which is embedding values in the R&D process, around designing agendas and mission kinds of agendas. And I think we can say something like, the new turn here is to think of technology policy in the socio-technical context, rather than in a kind of magic bullet kind of discourse.
はい、ありがとうございます。I'm looking forward to the renewed framework that you are going to develop. ありがとうございます。Okay, so let's turn to Polt さん、if you're ready.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. And I will start by saying I couldn't agree more with Professor Shiroyama when he pointed to the importance of an anticipatory stage when setting up topics, not only for missions, but for broader political actions which require a huge societal backing. And I think that has been missing in very many contexts. I think in the European Union, there was an anticipatory stage, but it was largely expert-driven. So we had set up mission boards comprised by wise old men, mainly, which came up with brilliant ideas. But then again, you would have to seek for the buy-in to the policies that they designed or the topics they identified from the member states, from the larger society. And you could have it the other way around as well. You could have first a discussion in all European countries on what these topics should be. You could have foresight exercises, participatory foresight exercises for that matter, which would have led to a different anticipatory stage. And I think that would have helped the process. So I couldn't agree more on that. And I would, as a second point, I would like to respond to one of the points that David has raised in the chat. I think really it is important as a next step to integrate the technology development, which in very many countries, including Japan and increasingly so also Europe again, involves industrial policy to merge with the missions. So if you align industrial policy, and in Europe, in the past couple of years, we have designed this instrument of important projects of common European interests, as they are called, which would be exempt from the very strict state aid laws that we have in Europe, which would mean that you could invest in battery technologies, microelectronic development, low carbon industries like clean steel or blue steel. And if we can combine what the European Union has laid out in its Green Deal industrial policy plan with the missions, that would be a major step forward. And I can only recommend more serious thinking about getting these lines of policy strands together, the industrial policy and technology policy side and the mission-oriented one. Thank you.
Thank you. ありがとうございます。時間が迫っているんですけれども、ちょっとだけ
Thank you very much. The times are running, but interpreters are willing to stay. So we would like to give more commentators a chance to speak out. So based on the comments already made, can anybody make any comments? Ms. Kurata? Well, the three speakers have already discussed important points, so I have nothing left to say. But regarding the first point, regarding the technology governance or emerging technology-oriented approach is one thing, and the other thing is the mission-oriented approach. But those two are not completely separate. Within the mission-oriented approach, there is a concept of well, for this goal, what kind of approach are there? And then we look at different options, and then we look at the emerging approach. And then in the technological approach, we also have the emerging approach combined as well. So it's not either one or the other, so both are interrelated. So given that, how can we look at what Shiroyama sensei talked about earlier? How can we have a foresight or anticipatory process? There are different options or approaches, but how can we anticipate the vision in the future? Or how can we do the analysis in advance?
We have done this up until now, but alongside with the new direction and new flow, I think we have to come up with something totally new. That's something I learned in today's discussion. And against this backdrop, many initiatives are being done in the communities, or maybe there could be the top-down approach from the government, and many things are very much diversified and very complicated, and the related agencies and organizations would increase. And then in that situation, it is important to visualize the entire process. With this, we are able to have the common view and the understanding of the situation. Thank you. Lastly, Oyamada-san, could you make a comment? Yes, about the SIP or Moonshot or other the initiatives in Japan. I think that you can agree with me in that all of them are very much technology centered, but still it has a vision and it is aimed for the social implementation. But still, technology alone would not lead to that kind of implementation. Final goals should be established. So we have social issues, and then in that situation, the ministries and agencies and also the local governments should look into this. Maybe the wise should not be the only ones, but the people who are interested in who are the stakeholders should be more interested and also more committed to that. And for that purpose, we can come up with a new system. For example, we have special zone for something, or we could have the initiatives to revitalize the local community. So we have to try to do things in a sturdy manner. And this way, people would be able to share common visions. And also, we are able to have the good benefit of what you do. And this should be put into the narrative. I'm not sure how I should put it in Japanese. I always think about this. Maybe the producer kind of way of things, the program director. Many people use the term program directors, but maybe the producers are the right term. So in the filmmaking, for example, in this field, this kind of producer approach is needed. Thank you very much. Initially, Dr. Shiroyama talked about about the theme that we have. We will have a summary and come up with the policy recommendation. So we were able to receive very precious input from all of you. Thank you very much. It's already past the scheduled closing time, so we'd like to ask Dr. Shiroyama to say the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. It was a short time, but we had a very dense discussion today. Aside from the specific points, at the last session, there were several people who said this, but in the actual research, things do not go well all the time. We have trials and errors, both in Japan and Europe, that is the case. But the transparency of the portfolio is something somebody talked about. So when we think about what we did, we should be able to see different records and experiences. By having this transparency, we can identify what we can do and what we can't do. Well, today there was not so much comments, but the Polt-san, you are working on the TRAMI project, but this is exactly the past 2 years' experiences, European experiences in transformation projects. So we can do something similar in Japan and maybe promote something together with Europe, between Japan and Europe. So that is something that we are hoping to do in the future. So with that, today, we appreciate this opportunity to share thoughts on these issues, and we are looking forward to the next time with the participants today and others. We like to continue to have those discussions. Thank you very much for the very interesting discussions today. I would like to say this in English.
For Winickoff-san and Polt-san for participating in our workshop, and I think that we understand that there are many difficulty for implementing the kind of idea, the responsible innovation or the mission-oriented approach, both in the context of the Europe and also in Japan. But maybe has to say the visualization and the learning lesson from each other based on the cases might be important. That's what we appreciate, and also that's exactly what Polt-san is doing in the context of the Torami project. So maybe we'd like to think about the next possibility for exploring the kind of the path in the future. So anyway, thank you very much for your participation, and we are looking forward to seeing you in person next time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. じゃあどうも皆さんありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
And let me add my thank you to all of you. And again, sorry we're not there in person, but I felt it was a very good exchange and wonderful to hear what's going on in Japan, and look forward to future conversations. One element to mention is we have this anticipatory project going. So if we want to link in particular to our work on a technology futures laboratory, let's continue the discussion there.
And I will certainly get in touch with you about possible ways to collaborate between TRAMI and your efforts, which I find extremely interesting, and there is a lot we can learn from that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
evening. Bye-bye.